David Harper arrived in Willow Bend with nothing more than a mule, a weathered Bible, and a reputation that followed him like dust on the trail. Folks said he'd walked away from a war back east, laid his rifle in the dirt, and never picked it up again. In a land where men measured worth by how fast they could draw, David's empty holster made him an oddity and an easy target. He claimed a modest plot just outside town near the bend of the river, where cottonwoods whispered even in still air. From sunrise to dusk, David worked the soil with steady hands, building fences, planting corn, and repairing a broken-down cabin most had written off as beyond saving. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice was calm, thoughtful, and unwavering, like a man who had already fought his hardest battles and chosen peace instead. Willow Bend noticed him, of course. They always noticed what didn't fit. What kind of fool comes out here without a gun? The blacksmith muttered one afternoon, the dead one, most likely. Someone else replied. David heard it all. He always did. And he never answered. Then there was Celine Cross. Her name carried weight in 3 counties, and fear in at least 2. She rode into Willow Bend one afternoon astride a black mare, dust swirling around her boots, twin revolvers resting easy at her hips. She had eyes sharp as cut glass and a posture that warned men not to test their luck. Some said she'd never lost a duel. Others said she'd never fired unless she had to. Either way, when trouble came riding, Celine was usually already there. She noticed David the first time she saw him kneeling in the dirt outside the mercantile, helping an old woman gather spilled grain while others stepped around them. No gun, no swagger, just quiet patience. That's him, the sheriff said, following her gaze. The pacifist. Celine raised a brow. Pacifist. Refuses to carry a gun. Says violence only breeds more of it. She scoffed softly. That's so. That evening, trouble came in the form of 3 drunk cowhands from Red Hollow. Loud, itching for a fight, they set their sights on David as easy sport. One shoved him, another laughed when David didn't shove back. Where's your iron, preacher? One sneered. David stood slowly, meeting the man's eyes without fear. I don't carry one. The punch came fast, but it never landed. Celine's revolver cleared leather in a blur, the shot tearing a hole clean through a nearby post instead. The sound cracked the air like thunder. Silence followed. Walk away, she said, her voice even deadly calm. They did. Later, as the crowd dispersed, David approached her. You didn't need to fire. She studied him, curious now. Sometimes you do. Sometimes, he agreed. But not always. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. In that stillness, something unfamiliar, stirred respect, perhaps, or the beginning of something neither of them yet understood. The fastest draw in 3 counties, and the man who refused to carry a gun had just crossed paths, and Willow Bend would never be the same. The morning after the incident at the mercantile, Willow Bend woke with a buzz it hadn't felt in years. Stories traveled faster than the river how Celine Cross had drawn down 3 Red Hollow men without so much as wrinkling her coat. How the quiet homesteader had stood his ground without lifting a fist. By noon, the tale had grown teeth. David noticed it in the way people watched him now. Some with admiration, others with disbelief. A few with irritation, as if his refusal to live by the gun challenged the very spine of the frontier. He ignored it all, hitching his mule and riding out to his land, where the earth asked nothing but honest labor. Celine rode out later that afternoon, her black mare picking its way through tall grass until the cabin came into view. She hadn't planned on a tat least, that's what she told herself. Curiosity had a way of tugging harder than intention. David looked up when he heard hoofbeats. He didn't flinch. He never did. You ride a long way from town, he said. So do you, she replied, swinging down from the saddle. Her eyes swept the land, the neat rows, the repaired fencing, the quiet order of it all. Didn't think a man like you would last a month out here. A lot of people don't, David said mildly. She crossed her arms. You don't believe in guns? Out here, that's like refusing water in the desert. I believe in choosing what kind of man I want to be, he answered. Even when it's harder. Celine studied him for a long moment. Harder usually gets you killed. Sometimes, he said. Sometimes it saves you. The wind moved through the cottonwoods, filling the silence between them. Celine felt something she didn't like: uncertainty. She'd lived her life with clear rules. Fast draw, faster judgment, survive. David Harper didn't fit into any of them. You won't change this land, she said finally. Men like the Red Hollow Bunch don't scare easy. I'm not trying to change them, David replied. Only myself. She shook her head, almost amused. You're either brave or foolish. Depends who's telling the story. Later that week, the tension sharpened. Red Hollow riders were spotted near the river. The sheriff doubled patrols. Whispers of retaliation floated through saloons and barns alike. Celine stayed in town, watchful, hand never far from her revolvers. David kept working. That was what unsettled her most. When 2 riders finally showed up at his homestead near dusk, Celine was already on her way, dust flying behind her horse. She arrived just as one man kicked over a bucket of water, laughing. Thought we'd pay you a visit, pacifist, the taller one said. See how long peace lasts. David stood in front of his cabin, shoulders squared. You're trespassing. The man laughed. And you're unarmed.
Yeah.
The punch came. David staggered but stayed upright. Blood touched his lip. Still, he didn't strike back. Celine's voice cut through the air. Step away from him. Both men froze. This ain't your business. Cross, one said. Everything in Willow Bend is my business, she replied. Guns drawn, but steady. Last chance. They mounted up and fled, curses trailing behind them. Celine holstered her guns and turned to David. You could have died. I know, he said. Why? She demanded. Why won't you fight? David wiped the blood from his mouth. Because every time I did before, I lost something I couldn't get back. Her anger softened, replaced by something quieter. You can't save everyone. I'm not trying to, he said gently. Just you, them, me. Celine looked away, unsettled. She had saved countless lives with a gun, but no one had ever tried to save her without one. And that realization stayed with her. Long after she rode back to town, the storm rolled in, low and heavy, darkening the sky over Willow Bend like a bad omen. Thunder echoed across the plains as rain began to fall in thick, unforgiving sheets. Most folks stayed indoors, shutters closed, guns close at hand. Trouble had a habit of riding in with weather like this. Celine stood under the overhang of the sheriff's office, watching the road that led out of town. She told herself she was on watch, that this was her job. But her thoughts kept drifting to David alone in that small cabin by the river. Stubborn as a fence post, refusing protection he clearly needed. Against her better judgment, she mounted up. By the time she reached David's homestead, the rain had soaked her coat and plastered her hair to her face. Light glowed faintly from the cabin window. She knocked once, hard. David opened the door, surprise flickering across his face. You shouldn't be riding in this. You shouldn't be out here without a gun, she shot back, stepping inside. The cabin was warm, simple, and clean. A kettle simmered over the fire. Books lined a single-shelf history, scripture, worn journals. Celine glanced at them, uneasy. You always expect trouble, David said quietly. And you always pretend it won't come, she replied. Thunder cracked overhead. For a moment, neither spoke. Celine finally broke the silence. You said before that fighting cost you something. What was it? David hesitated, then sat heavily on a stool. My brother, her breath caught. He believed in the gun more than anyone I knew, David continued. Said it was the only language men understood. One night, he proved himself right and wrong at the same time. Celine listened, unmoving. He killed a man in a dispute over land, David said. Might have been justified, might not, but when the dead man's son came back for revenge, my brother reached for his rifle again. His voice softened. This time he was too slow. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the rain. "I swore then I wouldn't live that way," David said. "I won't build my life around fear and killing, even if it means risking my own." Celine looked down at her hands, the same hands that had drawn faster than thought, more times than she could count. "Where I come from," she said slowly, "if you don't draw, you die." "Yet here you are," David said, still standing. She laughed bitterly. Barely. A sudden shout echoed outside. Both of them froze. Hoofbeats. More than one rider. Celine moved instantly, guns in hand. "Stay behind me." David shook his head. "No." She glared at him. "This isn't the time for principles." Outside, 3 figures dismounted near the fence. Red hollow men again. "We know you're in there." Cross one called, "Come out." Celine stepped toward the door. David caught her arm. "Killing them won't end this," he said. "And letting them kill you will," she snapped. David took a breath and stepped past her, opening the door wide. "Leave," he called out calmly. "There's nothing here for you." One of the men laughed. Another raised his gun. Celine's finger tightened on the trigger. Then David did something no one expected. He walked forward, and until he stood in the rain between them. "You want to fight," he said. "But you don't want the cost." "Neither do I." The men hesitated. The moment stretched. Finally, one spat into the mud. "This ain't worth it." They rode off, swallowed by the storm. Celine stared at David, shaken. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met, or the most dangerous." "Maybe both," he said softly. For the first time in years, Celine felt her certainty crack, and something else take its place. The storm passed, but it left something behind in Willow Bend, an unease that clung like damp clothes. The Red Hollow men hadn't come back, but no one believed they were finished. Men like that never were. Celine felt it in her bones. She took to riding the perimeter of town at dawn and dusk, watching the roads, counting unfamiliar tracks. Every instinct she had screamed that the calm was borrowed time. And every time her patrol passed the river bend, her eyes went to David's cabin. David, for his part, went on as he always had. He repaired a collapsed section of fence. He helped a neighbor bring in hay before the next rain. He spoke gently, listened more than he talked, and refused politely, but firmly every offer of a gun. "You can borrow mine," the sheriff urged one afternoon. "Just until this blows over." "I appreciate it," David said. But no, that night, Celine rode out to the homestead again. She told herself she was checking on him. She didn't tell herself how much she needed to see him safe. "You're becoming predictable," David said as she dismounted. She smirked. "Danger has a habit of circling the same place." They sat on the cabin steps as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in fire and gold. For a while, neither spoke. "Do you ever get tired," Celine asked suddenly, "of standing alone in what you believe?" David considered the question. "Sometimes, but I'd be more tired pretending to be someone I'm not." She nodded slowly. "I don't remember when I became this person," she admitted. "The one everyone expects to draw first." "You don't have to keep being her," he said. She laughed softly. "Out here, that's not how it works." Before David could answer, a distant shout cut through the evening. Smoke rose near the far end of town. Celine was on her feet instantly. "Stay here." "I won't," David said, already moving. They rode hard into Willow Bend. A building near the livery burned, flames licking the sky. Townsfolk scrambled with buckets, and there, standing near the edge of the firelight, were the Red Hollow men. This time, they weren't drunk. "This is what happens when you embarrass us," the leader shouted. "When you choose peace over respect." Celine stepped forward, guns drawn. "It ends now," the man smiled. "That's what we're counting on." A shot rang out. Chaos erupted. Celine moved on instinct, disarming one man, firing low to wound another. But there were more of them than she expected. Too many angles, too much fire. David saw it before she did. The way one rider circled behind her, rifle raised. "Celine," he shouted. He ran. No gun, no cover, just speed and resolve. He slammed into her, knocking them both to the ground as the shot went wide. They hit hard, breath knocked from their lungs. For a split second, Celine lay stunned, staring up at the sky. David shielded her with his body. The moment cracked something open inside her. She rolled, came up firing, ending the fight in seconds. The remaining men fled into the night, leaving smoke, silence, and shaken hearts behind. When it was over, Celine turned to David. Her hands were trembling. "You could have been killed," she said hoarsely. "So could you," he replied. She grabbed his coat. "Don't you see? This world doesn't care about your vows. And yet," he said gently, "you're still here. Because of a choice I made." Tears burned her eyes unexpected. "I don't know how to live without this," she whispered, touching one of her guns. David placed his hand over hers. "I'm not asking you to be like me. Only to believe there's more than one way to be strong." The fire died down. The town stood quiet, and Celine Cross, fastest draw in 3 counties, realized she didn't want to lose the man who refused to carry a gun. Not now, not ever. The days after the fire changed Willow Bend in ways no one expected. The Red Hollow men never returned. Whether fear, shame, or exhaustion drove them away, no one knew for certain. What the town did know was this: violence had come looking for a fight and hadn't found the ending it wanted. David healed slowly from his bruises, though he waved off concern as best he could. Celine, on the other hand, stayed close. Too close, some whispered. The woman, once known only for her guns now, spent mornings helping repair fences, afternoons riding the land with David, evenings sitting quietly as the sun set over the river. "People noticed you hanging up your iron now," the sheriff teased one day. Celine glanced at her holsters. "No, just learning when not to reach for them." That night, she stood outside David's cabin, revolvers laid carefully on the table inside. The weight of that decision pressed heavier than any gun ever had. "I don't know who I am without them," she admitted. David stepped beside her. "You're the woman who protects what matters. The rest is just how you learned to survive." She looked at him, then really looked. The man who had faced rifles with empty hands, the man who had changed her without ever asking her to change. "I stayed alive by being fast," she said. "You stayed alive by being true." "And now?" he asked. "And now," she said softly, "I want to try it your way. At least sometimes." David reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. They didn't need vows or grand declarations. In the quiet of Willow Bend, their choice was enough. Celine still rode armed when danger called. David still worked the land with bare hands and open heart. Together, they became something the frontier rarely saw a balance. Strength without cruelty. Courage without bloodshed. Willow Bend remembered them, not as legends, but as proof that the West could be shaped by more than the gun. And in time, so did the land. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.